hardest part about the bombing was actually covering the trials. You heard hour after hour after hour of testimony from people who lost their loved ones, from first responders. It was just the heaviest grief I've ever felt covering a story. So there was a testimony that this woman had been at the site of the bombing right after it happened, and of course rescuers are running in and trying to find survivors and running them out, and some of them were carrying babies. And this woman came up and she said, "You're laying all these babies on the glass. Stop laying these babies on the glass." And even though they were dead, some man from somewhere found a broom and he came over and he swept away that glass so that they could lay those babies out and they wouldn't be on glass. We heard stories about a first responder who ran into the building. The first victim he scoops up when he comes out into the sunlight and can see is a dead baby, so he lays it down and he runs back in and scoops up the next victim that he can find, and he lays it outside in the sunlight when he can see it's a baby. And he testified that he dropped to his knees and he said, "God, I want to be here and I want to help, but I cannot pick up one more dead baby." So the testimony was he ran back into the building and scooped up a child who had a brick in his head, but he was alive. And he said he chased after the ambulance because they were going and coming so fast, and with his arms full, he kicked the door of that ambulance. And they opened the doors and he laid that baby inside that ambulance and off it went. And that's what gave him the strength to continue his rescue efforts that day. And then we were sent to Terre Haute, Indiana to cover the executions. It was really one of those moments where you're like, I was there the day of the bombing. I covered all the trials, and now I'm here the day that he's being put to death. There were so many groups there with different viewpoints, and all I could remember when we were covering the execution was all that testimony I'd heard about all the death and the devastation that was caused to those victims.
From his arrest and conviction and ultimate execution, Timothy McVeigh became the first face of terrorism in America.
Lisa Monahan talks to a state trooper whose traffic stop for a missing car tag led to the arrest of McVeigh less than 90 minutes after the Oklahoma City bombing.
On April 19, 1995, the sun rose like any other day, lighting the way and sending forth the city's faithful.
If you are anywhere downtown, you've probably heard it and felt it.
About a third of the building has been blown away.
An angry but calculating ex-soldier delivered the blow, parking a truck bomb in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, then slipping away as people died and Oklahoma City buckled.
I get a radio call from my headquarters telling me to respond to Oklahoma City.
State Trooper Charlie Hanger quickly turned his lights and sirens toward the city.
Just as I started south on Interstate 35, I get a second radio call telling me to disregard that assignment.
Hanger changed his course near Perry and thereby changed the course of history.
That's why I'm so convinced of the divine intervention. I passed this old yellow Mercury, but as I go by and I look to the rear bumper where his license plate should be, there was no license plate there.
The driver, later determined to be America's most wanted domestic terrorist, pulled over for the trooper.
I yelled for the driver to get out of his car.
As Timothy McVeigh handed over a driver's license, the trooper became more suspicious.
And I tell him, I said, I want you to take both hands. I want you to slowly unzip that jacket. And he looks at me and he says, I have a weapon. I just reach up and I grab the bulge on the outside of his jacket where the weapon is. I'm spinning him around and telling him, get your hands up. And I pull my weapon and I stick it to the back of his head.
How does it feel to be the person that was there to stop him?
I didn't do anything heroic. I was just doing my job like officers do every day. But I was glad to be the representative that had that opportunity to stop him and arrest him.
As Hanger drove McVeigh to the Noble County Jail to book him for illegally carrying a handgun, no one except McVeigh himself knew the significance of the arrest.
I'm not surprised that he didn't put up any fight because I think he was a coward. He ambushed the victims in the Murrah Building.
In Oklahoma City, FBI agents made a critical find. the axle from the truck bomb, which led them to the place where the truck was rented, and to the man who rented it. On April 21st, shortly before McVeigh was to be released from the jail in Perry, the FBI moved in, naming Timothy McVeigh the prime suspect in the bombing.
I can't imagine what kind of a person could do that. A heinous act of hurting and killing so many people, and you can't see it.
If anyone could have seen it, it would have been Charlie Hanger in that fateful first encounter, divine intervention with the soldier who fell from grace.
When you look in someone's eyes, you feel like that maybe that's the windows to their soul. I didn't see anything in his eyes.
In the hallways and in his office in Enid, where Stephen Jones continues to practice law, there is a collection of political pictures and legal memorabilia. Much of it is related to his highest profile case.
It's a tremendous explosion.
Can you tell me your name?
The Oklahoma City bombing.
This one is a particular favorite of mine.
Jones never thought a federal court would appoint him to represent Timothy McVeigh.
Although, curiously, my wife had told me that shortly after it became known that someone had been arrested, she said, "Jonesy, they're going to call you to defend him."
With 24 hours to decide whether to take the case, Jones talked with his wife and children, close friends, and people whose opinions he valued.
Certainly, I'd been involved in controversial cases before, but I hadn't been in one in which I thought my wife or children or home or associates or even the building where I practice law would be at risk.
Scott, how you know, Scott?
Jones accepted the job, which would thrust him into the national spotlight.
I considered that I had been asked by the court to represent him, that I had a constitutional duty to do that unless there was some conflict.
Jones and his partners gave away all of their clients to other lawyers to focus solely on defending Tim McVeigh.
Generally and overall, you're satisfied, you're upbeat.
Yeah, things are looking better.
The challenging job would last 2.5 years.
It was exhausting, certainly emotionally, although I'm not perhaps aware of it at the time.
While criticized by some in the media and political leaders for representing McVeigh, Jones says most Oklahomans understood he had a job to do, despite the horrific crime.
I was never accosted or harassed or stalked.
Now, 25 years after the bombing, I asked Jones what it was like to represent McVeigh, the man accused of causing so much heartache.
We didn't try to judge him. That was not our purpose. Our purpose was to defend him.
Jones says the only reason he can talk about McVeigh on a personal level, even after McVeigh's execution, is because Tim McVeigh waived attorney-client privilege.
I never saw the 1,000-yard stare that he exhibited when he came out of the courthouse at Perry in Noble County the day he was arrested.
Jones calls the bombing a never-ending wrong for families who lost loved ones. And it's important to keep the memory of the Oklahoma City bombing alive to honor those who were killed.
And the magnitude of it is, I think, lost on people, and it's appropriate to mark it. The effect in Oklahoma was devastating. It is to us our Pearl Harbor Day. Anyone alive at that time that was of any age remembers where he or she was on that day.
As for reflecting on his role in defending McVeigh, who many considered the most hated man in America, Jones says hopefully people believe he did a competent job and did what he was supposed to do.
The justice of a society is measured by how we treat its worst citizens, not its best. And every person charged with a crime should have a lawyer. And if they can't afford one, one should be appointed.
The star witness in the bombing trials was an Army buddy of Timothy McVeigh. Michael Fortier was released from federal prison in 2006. He served more than 10 years for not telling anyone about McVeigh and Terry Nichols' plan to bomb the Murrah Building.